Welcome to the Sage Thought Leadership Podcast, building experiences that connect, remove friction, and deliver insights. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Ed Kless, and with me today is Rick Walker. Rick is an experienced founder, leader, and thinker across a variety of domains. He scaled his first company to 400 employees when he was 26 and simultaneously, as chairman, grew a 53-country international nonprofit from 800 to 2,100 team members while helping his hometown of Houston attract over $5 billion in job creation investments. Rick's volunteer service includes a stints as the director of a college in the Middle East and the chairman of a $250 million charitable foundation. His 3:30 wake-up time helps him fit everything in. Welcome to the Sage Thought Leadership Podcast, Rick Walker.
Ed, great to be with you.
Well, first off, Rick, why do you do what you do?
Well, I think that we've got to come to the fact that we're going to approach people and approach life in one or two ways. That either we're going to approach life like it's the material world is all that counts, and we're going to go into business, we're going to go into work for the materiality of it. It's this impression that Lewis wrote and said that you can consider people to be primarily bodies, the earth to be primarily material, and there's a soul or there's a spirit that's sort of secondary. But from my perspective, I like to take the inverse of that I like to consider people to be primarily spirit that just happen to have a body. That if you're primarily spirit, you're going to live forever, and I'm going to give you a higher degree of respect, a higher degree of authority in our conversations, and I'm more likely to take the nature of a servant when we approach our business relationship rather than the person that's trying to get the best bargain or the best deal out of the negotiations. And so that's really why I like business. That's why I like the work aspect of it, because we can take this and we can dignify the human in a way that you really can't do in other elements of life, right? If you're in a sport, you've got to beat the other person. But if you're in business, you can have this cooperation that really dignifies the counterparty.
And why is it so important for business people to apply knowledge from non-business domains to the business?
Yeah, so business strategy itself is a derivative of military strategy, right? We've got chief executive officers that you would have in a military rank. You've got the ranks. You have various types of strategies. And so we see that there's this correlation between non-business areas of learning and business. And so I started to read the various works of classical literature. I started to look at different elements of music. I started to read about the sciences and other domains. And I realized that all of these have interplay if we look close enough, especially in the world of religions. Take for example, in music, you've got the great German composer Mahler, in his epic treatise, which is the Mahler 5, the Fifth Symphony. It starts with this trumpet that's soloing, and for those of us that aren't that musically inclined, we typically hear the trumpet solo as the hero, the Star Wars type of hero. But Mahler has this different bent on it, Eddie. It's really a funeral procession that's led by the trumpet at the very, very beginning of his Fifth Symphony. And what we learn about that is that it's necessary sometimes to start with a tragedy, to start with loneliness, to start with this negativity in our pursuits. It's the story of the entrepreneur. It's the story of the entrepreneur. And as you listen to Mahler 5, especially that first movement, you see the trumpet solo leading into a heavy, dense German minor thematic that reverts back to the soloist. And it's this interplay between the leader who's suffering, who's giving of himself into the depths to lead the rest of the group out into the heights. And you see this in the moments where the minor turns into the major, where the counter melody turns into the prime melody, where the cymbals enter and the full orchestra comes in their grandest moments together. And that tells you a little bit about how teamwork should work. That the leader is required to suffer for the greater good, and he has to come out first. And it's only through the leader's suffering, through the leader's effort, through the leader's struggles, that then the entire group can ascend. And at times it's necessary for the leader to move out front of the group, and it's time for the leader to subvert themselves to the rest of the group and to move into the background and become subservient. And so I think that's one thing that we learn when we look at, say, Mahler 5. He wrote that actually the summer after he met the love of his life at age 50. I think it was 1901, 1902. He started composing that. But he had lived the first 50 years of his life in this depressive, this sort of funeral-like states. Not very much success in the composer world. He was a very, very successful conductor. But once he met the love of his life, he only had 10 years left. And so it was a life that was marked by 50 years of tragedy, 50 years of struggle, and 10 years of love and joy. And I think that tells us a little bit about what sometimes business is like.
There's a video I saw a long time ago with David Robinson, the basketball player, and a famous leader of a string quartet. A quintet, I believe it is, because it's basketball, and the overlay is really interesting because first you have the leader of the quintet talking and them showing what's happening on the basketball court, and then Robinson talking, and then they're showing what's happening in the string quintet. So it's a pretty interesting dichotomy of back and forth of these five people playing together, creating something new that didn't exist before, or even having set plays. Just like there's set music, but improvising and doing their thing to make it their own. So talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. And there's so much correlation there too, right? You look at the succession of David Robinson to Tim Duncan on that team, and the leadership, the mentorship, where you would on occasion you would see Tim Duncan playing the forward and David Robinson playing center, and then you run sort of a double forward type of setup. It was really, really impressive. And I think about basketball analogies. I think about this idea of the glue men. If you remember, I guess it was probably the early 2000s, mid 2000s. There was this player named Shane Batty on the Houston Rockets, just 3 hours east of the Spurs, who eventually could not win a championship with Houston, and he was recruited by the Miami Heat. He finally won his championship there. But here's a guy that scored 3 points a game. He was very frequently a starter. And people are wondering, why is he getting paid what he's getting paid? It's because you need the glue guy, and that's who he was. He was the quintessential glue guy. You think of like a Manu Ginobili or someone like that on the Spurs playing along with Tim Duncan. You think of someone like a Vlade Divac. I think he was also on the Spurs for a time playing with Tim Duncan. And you look at these guys, and they're glue guys. They're glue guys. And who do you need to make a team function? Who do you need to make a quartet function? You need the viola to make the quintet function, just like you need the glue guy to make the basketball team function. And you're right, like this all interplays with teams.
And Rick, we have an exit question that we ask all of our guests, and that is, who is a hero of yours and why are they a hero?
Wow. So I would say both my mom and my dad. Both my mom and my dad. My dad was out of work for a while we were growing up. And my mom worked two and a half full-time jobs. And I remember her working, it seemed like 24-hour shifts growing up. And then on the weekends, my dad would take us all out as a family, and we would go door to door, and he would cold call these banks because they would have flagpoles. And along the Texas coast, these flagpoles would rust at an accelerated rate. And so he would go up and paint these flagpoles to be able to provide for the family. And I think about that sacrifice, like literally putting his life on the line to be able to put food in our mouths. That's the nature. That's the very definition of a hero. It's the maximal type of love, that the love that sacrifices the greatest thing, your life, in order to provide something that's necessary for those that are least deserving, a child. And I think about that in the context of my parents. I would say definitely my mom and my dad, still alive, thank God. They're my heroes.
And lastly, Rick, how can somebody contact you?
Yeah, so Twitter handle, YouTube handle, Rick Walker TX, and it's Rick Walker TX. I'm also on LinkedIn if you just want to Google me, Rick Walker. And I'm also available at Strategic Capital, STRATIQ .co.
All right, Rick Walker, thanks so much for being a guest on the Sage Thought Leadership Podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Review and subscribe by searching your podcast player of choice for Sage Thought Leadership Podcast.